Take a look at this. It's a tiny 2.5-inch Freestyle FPV quad with DJI O4 that can be built sub 100 grams, and it has the same thruster weight ratio as a 5-inch. Even better, this build is around $250, but with other parts you can probably make this even cheaper. This is the Kayoumini from kayo-frames, and today we're going to do a full build video from start to finish. This is a relatively simple build when you know how to do it. The first one took me a little bit longer because I had to figure out how to fit all of this in there with DJI O4, which is why I figured I'd build a third one today just to show you exactly how all of this goes together. For full disclosure, I bought these frames myself, and shout out to Ummagawd FPV for showing me this last year. I'll leave a link to his channel down below, and I'll do a more in-depth video on these builds in the future because they're a ridiculous amount of fun. So consider subscribing to see that video when it comes out in the future. This is going to be a fairly long video as I'm going to go step by step through the entire build process, but as always I'm going to leave timestamps down below so you can jump around the video to what you need or come back another time if you don't want to build this in one go. The one thing I'm not going to do is go through the tuning process for this quad. I am still playing around with it at this point, but there is a stock tune that you can get on the Kayo website, which I will link to down below, and I'll show you what those settings look like later on in the video. But the quad flies pretty well on the stock tune, so start with that and then we can go from there. Grab a coffee, I'll get the music going in the background, and let's start the build. Okay, so let's go through all the parts that you're going to need for this build. You're going to need a Kayoumini frame from kayo-frames, and you can get these in a few other places too. You're also going to need one of these Flywoo GOKU AIOs, which is the F405HD. This has ELRS built in, so it makes it even easier to build with. And it also has a DJI port too. You will need a DJI O4 air unit like this one. Now let's talk about motors. I'm going to be using these T-Motor 1103 8000 kV motors on this build, which are basically what Kayo recommend. On my other Kayoumini builds, I use the 11,000 kV motors, and I kind of limit those motor outputs to give me the feel of an 8000, but whilst flying it around, I actually think the 11,000 would be better because it gives you a bit more pop, and it allows you to get out of tricks a little bit more easily as well. You want one of these battery pads. I'm going to be using this, which is Ummagrip. I'm just going to cut that down to size. And very important, you're going to need some additional standoffs. The ones that come with the frame are either 8mm or 12mm. You'll want 14mm minimum, maybe 15mm if you want a bit more space. So next up, you're going to need some of these gummies, which are a bit more lower profile than the ones that come with the GOKU stack. Now, if you're using 15mm standoffs, you might get away with it, but for the 40mm standoffs, you need these lower profile ones. I couldn't find these individually where I live, so I bought this Beta FPV Whoop Spares pack, and they have a ton of these in there as well. Now this isn't needed, but I like using them. These are from Quadmula. These are kind of stack nuts. There are stack nuts that come with the stack. You can use those instead, but I prefer to use these brightly colored ones as they're made of TPU. You're also going to need 4 of these M2 1mm spacers, which are made of nylon. They just prevent you from cinching down too hard on the DJI O4 unit on top of the AIO. You'll need a couple of 3D prints as well. You'll need one for the camera that goes on the front of the frame, like this one. And you'll also need a backpack for the antenna. And I would suggest that you use the 8mm one because that gives you enough room below and above it to fit another antenna and the pigtail as well. So don't use the 12mm one, use the 8mm one for this. Now let's talk about props. I use HQ props for all of my builds, and HQ have 2 sets of different 2.5-inch props, and this one says 2.5-inch and this one says 65mm, and they're not the same. They are very different. The 65mm one is actually a lot lighter and has like a smaller mount, so you can use smaller screws. These are what the 65mm ones look like. They are the same size prop, by the way, but on my other 2.5-inch build, this is what a 2.5-inch HQ prop looks like. So they are very different. The 65mm ones are a little bit lighter, but you can use either of these. It's not really a problem. The quad flies great with both. Okay, so let's get into the tools that you're going to need for this build. You will need a 1.5mm hex driver like this one. This one's electronic. You can use a manual one, that's not a problem. You are going to need a pair of snips for the wires. You're also going to need a soldering iron, and you need one with a thin head on the top because that AIO is pretty small and the pads are pretty small as well. You're going to need a pair of tweezers. I would get ones with a needle nose at the top. And you'll need some flux, and I always use this pen type flux because it's easy to put on and it's no clean as well. You're going to need some solder. I prefer to use this TBS solder because it also has flux in it. You will need some tape as well. You can use electrical tape instead of this. I prefer this fabric tape because it protects the wires from prop strikes much better. You're going to see me using this helping hand set. It's an Omni Fixo. You don't actually need one of these. You can just use blue tack, but I find this thing really, really helpful for building. Just in case you were wondering what it was. Okay, so let's get into the build. We're going to open up this frame really quickly, and you get all of these parts in there. So you get a bottom plate, which is a one-piece bottom plate, and the carbon on this is really, really nice. And you'll also get a tiny, tiny top plate that goes along with this too. There's a mini Kayo branded battery strap, which is very cool and fits the batteries perfect. And then there's a hardware set which has those little standoffs, but a load of screws, including stack screws and motor screws in there too. So we're just going to open this up so that we can pull these out, and then I will show you that these are the 14mm standoffs right here. And if I just take one of those and compare that to the 12mm one, you can see how much additional space you're going to get by using that. So don't use the 12mm one that comes in the pack. You'll probably want one that's a bit larger. We're going to take the 4 longest screws in that pack, and we're going to take the locking nuts as well, because we're going to start to build the stack as part of this. So you're going to take your frame, and it's the same on both sides. You don't need to worry about making sure that it's one side up or the other. And you're going to put the stack screws in this diamond pattern right here. So I'm going to put the first one in. I'm just going to put this through the corner here, and then we're going to put this locking nut down onto the stack screw. And then once that's in, we're just going to tighten this up a little bit with a screwdriver just to make sure it sits in properly. And then what you want to do is you want to do the same for the other 3 screws that have to go in. And you should end up something that looks a little bit like this. In that pack, there are 4 screws that are about a medium length, and these are going to be the ones that your standoffs bolt onto from the bottom plate. So we're just going to move these over here for now. We're going to come back to those a little bit later on, but it's worth just getting those ready for the next thing. So we're going to grab the GOKU AIO, and we're also going to grab pigtail and then some of the leads. What we don't need is the little gummies that come with them. In fact, I'll show you how these compare to the ones that I got in the Beta FPV pack, and you can see the size difference of those gummies. So we'll use the smaller ones for this build. You can keep the other ones in the pack there. Just put that away as well, and then get rid of this. Okay, so now it's time for us to prepare the AIO. We actually don't want to put the gummies in right now because we're going to be heating up this board as we're going to prepare it for soldering. And the soldering on this board is actually quite minimal. So the only thing that we need to do is the power and ground cable for the pigtail, and then also the motor pads as well. So I'm just going to clip this into the helping hands there to make it a little bit easier to keep in one place. And in the pack that you got with the GOKU AIO, you should have a wiring diagram as well, which will tell you where things are. But on here, it's pretty easy to see which ones are the ground and the VBAT pad, which are the ones that say ground and VCC for some reason, but they're the largest 2 pads that are on the AIO. So we're going to take the soldering iron, we're going to add some flux to both of those pads. And we're going to start with the ground one first because that takes a little bit longer to heat up. So we're just going to hold the soldering iron in on the pad here. And then we are just going to add some solder as soon as that starts to heat up. And then you should have that pad prepped. We're going to do, just going to take a little bit of that off. And then we're going to do the same with the VCC pad as well. This one should be a little bit quicker to heat up. And then, okay, that looks pretty good. So when you've done that, you should have something that looks a bit like this. I'm just going to bring that up to the camera so you can see a little bit easier. Let me put my soldering iron down so I don't burn the camera. And it should look a little bit like this. Now, if you take a look at the motor pads, there are motor pads on top of the board, but we're going to use these ones along the side here because they're a little bit larger. And I have tried using the top ones before and the motors just kept coming off. So we're going to use the side motor pads. So we're going to flux those first. I'm going to do that on all 4 of these sets of motor pads. And then we're just going to tin all of these motor pads. We're going to put bit of heat on there and then just add a touch of solder. You don't need to heat this up as long as the main power and ground cable. These will go on very, very quickly. So once that's done on one side, we're just going to do exactly the same on the other 3 sides too. And that is your motor pads done, and your AIO is now prepared for the build. And it should look something a little bit like this. Okay, so the AIO has an arrow on it which we want to be pointing forwards. And on the frame as well, just make sure that the frame is this way round with the kind of longer carbon part pointing forwards. And that's the way that you want to install this. So just take the gummies, squeeze them between your fingers, and then you can just push that straight in on each side. Now we're just going to place this onto those stack screws with that arrow pointing forwards. And it's a little bit fiddly, it doesn't go straight on, you just need to kind of make sure that it lines up perfectly, and then it should slide in no problem. And once that's fully down, what you will find if you turn it over is that the USB-C fits perfectly into that hole for later on. Okay, so now we're going to do the pigtail, and the pigtail that comes with this is pretty long. We don't want it to be too long because it will get chopped up by the propellers and everything. So we're going to kind of slightly measure this just so that it kind of pokes out the back. So I'm going to place this on top of the 2 pads here, and then just angle that around just to see how much of that will be poking out of the back of the quad. And yeah, that looks about right. Probably need a little bit more, just a little bit more leeway on there. And yeah, that looks about right. So what I'm going to do is just use my nail to mark onto the wire right there. And then I'm going to take a pair of snips and we're going to cut them. Now, I'm actually going to cut them at slightly different lengths because the ground wire is actually a little bit closer to the back than the live wire. So I'm just going to make that a little bit longer. And now as I fit that back onto the board, you should see that it fits perfectly. Okay, we need to now prepare the pigtail for soldering. So I'm just going to take my nail and just cut into the coating on the wire there, if I can get through it. I'm just going to pull off some of that coating, just like that. And then we're going to do the same on the red wire too. And just pull that off. So we've got some serious silicone covering on this. Okay, so I'm just going to twist the ends of this just to make sure that all of those wire strands are neat and tidy. And I'll do the same on this one too. And then I just want to grab my helping hands again, just to make this a little bit easier. And we're going to get the flux pen and just add a bit of flux both to these wires, but I'm also going to add this to the pads that I'm about to solder this onto as well. Sorry about the focus on my camera here. And I'm going to grab my solder and I'm going to heat up the back of this wire just at the tip here. And then by adding the solder onto the front here, and once that heats up enough, it starts to absorb the solder into the wire, also known as tinning the wire. So once both of those are tinned, we can then grab our flight controller. I'm going to do this actually in the frame. I don't need to remove it from the frame in order to do this. So we're just going to pin the frame into the helping hands as well. And then I'm just going to position the wires into the place that I want them. So I'm actually going to bend the ends of these because I find this a little bit easier to solder. And then once they're in place as well, I don't want to damage that connection. So I would rather bend these now because this is going to come out the back of the quad. Okay, so we're going to move this into position and I'm going to put the wire that I'm going to solder like over the pad, like this. Just move that in a little bit more. So I'm just going to move this wire out of the way because I want to do the ground wire first. And I'm just going to put that back on top of there. And now I'm just going to hold it with the tweezers. I'm going to hold it in position and then I'm going to add some heat. And I'm just going to do this using a bit more of the flat side of that iron, and because it's tinned it should just connect pretty simply. You don't have to push down hard on it or anything like that, it will just go on. And we're going to do the same as well for the red wire. I'm just going to add some heat, add a little bit more on that one, and that is now connected. I'm just going to take this out of the helping hands so that you can see it up close, but you should have something that now looks, yeah, that looks good, something that looks a bit like this. That pigtail's going to go out the back of the frame there. Okay, next we're going to start adding the motors. So grab your 4 motors, and you're also going to want to grab your motor screws. That you can easily use the ones that come in the pack with the motors themselves, or in the Kayoumini there's ones specifically made because of the size of this frame. In this case I'm going to use the ones from Kayu, and you just want to place your motor on here and then grab 4 of these little screws. I'm just going to line that up on the frame with our screwdriver. Put one of the screws in there, and then you just want to kind of tighten that down. You don't want to tighten it too tightly. You can feel when it's kind of just locked in. I'm just going to do that for the rest of them, and then you will have the first motor in place and it will look like this. Okay, so we want to do exactly the same but with the other 3 motors. And I'm going to speed this up so that you're not watching me screw in a bunch of screws over and over again. And once you have all of those in, you should end up with something that looks like this, which is a bit of a mess with the wires, but we're going to fix that in the next step. So you are going to need to grab your tape, and I've kind of cut a load of strips of that tape down. Again, you can use electrical tape, you don't have to use the same tape that I'm using here. And we're just going to add this on to tidy up some of those motor wires, because it makes it easier to cut and solder if the motor wires are kind of attached to the frame. Just going to make sure that these wires are sitting flat against the carbon there, and then I always start with the carbon and then wrap that around, move those out of the way, and just make sure that that wraps around a couple of times. And that should look like something like this. And we're going to do the same now for all 3 of the other motors, which I'll speed up again just so that you don't have to watch me adding tape 3 more times. And you'll end up with something that looks like this, and those wires are very, very long. So in the next stage, we're going to cut these down to fit. So you want to grab your snips, and basically what you want to do is just position the wires over the motor pads that you've got there, and then cut them longer than you think you need them. You can still fix it if you do cut them too short. It's just very painful to do it. So just cut a little bit longer than you think you need. And I'm just going to cut those right here. Yes, I'm cutting all 3 of these at the same time, which is not very good practice, but don't judge me. And I'm going to do the same on all 3 of the other motors as well. Okay, you should have something that now looks like this. It looks a little bit tidier, and don't worry if your motor wires are longer or shorter than what I have here. But we're now going to pick the ends of the silicon off of these wires like I did before. I'm having a real hard time getting the silicon off of these wires today. So we're just going to pick that off, and then we're just going to twist the end of that wire to tidy it up, just like we did with the pigtail a moment ago. And I'm going to do the same for this one. Okay, that was a little bit easier. And then I'm just going to do the same with this one as well. And so you end up having the ends of those motor wires showing like this, and then we're just going to tidy those up. Do the same again for all 3 of the other motor wires, and then you should be ready to start soldering. So we're going to actually tin all of the ends of these wires as well. And what I'm going to do is grab my tweezers and just maneuver these slightly apart so that I don't end up melting one of the wires as I'm kind of soldering another one. And like before, you're just going to put the soldering iron behind it, heat it up, and then touch the solder onto the front, and it will absorb that into the wire. We're going to do the same for all 3 on this motor. Just get a little bit extra solder, and we're going to do it for this last one too. Doesn't need a lot of heat. This will heat up pretty quickly. Okay, so that is one of the motors done, and you've kind of tinned all 3 of those wires. Now we want to do exactly the same for the other 3 motors. When you're done, you should have something that looks a bit like this. All of those motor wires nice and tinned, and then we're just going to start adding flux to each of those motor pads, as we're going to start to solder the motor wires onto the AIO. Okay, so let's get soldering onto the pads, and we're just going to place that one over the pad, and then we're going to touch the soldering iron on there. Just a little bit of heat, although that just slightly moved so it didn't go on. Okay, I'm just going to hold this with my little finger while I add some heat on there, and that's now attached. We'll go to the second motor wire. I'm just going to bend this wire down and in a little bit. Just hold that against the heat, and I'm not sure. Don't like how that's gone on. You know, let me redo that one. Just gonna touch that onto the pad. And sorry about my camera. I don't know why it keeps going out of focus. It's actually quite annoying. And I'm going to take this final bit of wire. I'm just going to bend this in. It's actually much harder to do with a camera in front of my face than if I'm just working on the bench. So bear with me for the mess that I'm making of this right now. And I'm just going to touch the heat on there as well. And that is all 3 motor wires now connected. You're going to do the same on each of the other motors. I like to tidy the wires up a little bit afterwards, but you should end up with something that looks like this. And that is all the soldering that you're going to need to do for this build. Everything else is much easier. So let's get the DJI O4 air unit out. And in the case the O4 air unit comes with this front lens on the camera, we're not going to need that because that won't fit into the camera mount. In this little baggie here, you also get some gummies, which we're going to use for this build. We don't need the other parts, so you can put those away. And we're going to add these gummies onto the air unit now, but you want that longer part of the gummy to be facing down away from the antenna. And I'm just going to squeeze these in. And then with the camera mount, we need to add the camera and also the standoffs, but we're going to put the camera in first. And you want the camera cable to be coming out the top of the camera when you push this in. Once you push this in, it is very difficult to get it back out again, so just make sure that you get it the right way around when you put it in the first time. So we're just going to add this into there. It's a very tight fit. It will kind of lock itself in there, so you kind of need to push it in there a little bit. And then we just need to spread that a little bit and then push a little bit more. You'll see when it goes in correctly, you'll hear it kind of click into place. I'm just going to put a little bit more force in there, and yeah, there we go. The camera is now into that mount correctly. Grab your 14mm standoffs and you're going to put these in to the camera mount here. This is a little bit fiddly. They are very tight, so you kind of have to squeeze these in. It takes a little bit of time as well, so I'm just going to push those in off camera, and you'll end up with something that looks like this. Okay, now when you're putting the DJI air unit on, it goes in a very, very specific way. It doesn't fit in always, but you want the USB to be facing out to the front left like this. And don't worry, this cable will fit and reach the other side of the AIO. Okay, so you want to take your little M2 spacers and just place these on top of the AIO gummies like this. And we're also going to add the backpack, so you're just going to poke the antenna through this hole here, and then we're just going to add this to the air unit now. Okay, before you go any further, make sure you put this ELRS antenna onto the AIO. So you're just going to push that a little bit harder, and it just pushes flat. It will kind of click straight into place once you get it. It's a little bit fiddly, and then that's going to come straight across here and out the back. I would normally avoid putting anything over the AIO, but in this case there's no other way of really doing it. And so now with that installed, you can grab your DJI air unit, and we're gonna put this in a very specific way. So let's grab the cable, and we're gonna plug this into the AIO right here. If you've got 15mm standoffs, you can put this cable over the top of the air unit. Because I'm using 40mm standoffs, it's more likely that's going to get pulled out by the battery strap. So I am actually putting it under the air unit across the AIO, which I wouldn't normally do, but in this case it's the best way of fitting this in. Once that's on top, we can grab our little locking nuts and put those on. So we're just gonna tighten that down. We just need to get it on correctly. Okay, and then we're just gonna cinch that down a little bit. You'll feel when that goes in. And then we're going to do the same for the other 3 as well. Once those are on, it should look something like this. If you've used the nuts that came with the GOKU AIO, it will look a little bit different, but same kind of thing. Now we want to add these standoffs at the back here, and I've kind of put these on to one side, but actually I want to push these down so that the backpack is kind of in the middle of the standoff. This will give me a bit of extra room to fit the antenna underneath it, but also it's going to allow me to put the pigtail over the back of it as well. And you know, that won't go in without that, so I am going to just use my fingers and push that through. It does take a little bit of force. This is very, very tight. Okay, that is probably about right on that side. And then I'm just going to place this on top of the antenna here. It doesn't feel like it's going to fit, but it does. Trust me on this. You want to get your screw through here like this, and then just screw that in. And then you can do the same on the other side as well. And now you don't even need an ELRS antenna mount. That is held perfectly fine. I'm just going to push this antenna back through just a little bit, and then move that over to one side here. Okay, so now we're gonna do the other standoffs at the front, which is for the camera, and the camera has like a little lip underneath it, which goes under the frame, like this. And then we are just gonna add the other standoff screws here, and then you just want to kind of line that up, and then you can screw that straight in on that side. And then we just want to do the same on the other side as well. Okay, perfect. I'm just going to tighten up a little bit. And now you should have something that looks like this. I'm just going to move this cable over. I'm just going to tuck it underneath the antenna cable here. And this is basically the final build. There's a few more things that we need to do to set it up. So if you have one, grab a smoke stopper and your battery, and then we're just going to plug this in to make sure that everything is okay. And I'm going to plug this end of the smoke stopper to this end of the smoke stopper into the quad, and then I'm going to plug the battery in here and hope that everything works fine. We've got good tones and good lights, so that seems to be okay. I'm now going to plug this in without the smoke stopper just to make sure that there's no issue, and hopefully there's no magic smoke. Okay, just make sure that's the right way around. It is. And okay, that's all good to go. So hopefully you've also reached this stage and there hasn't been any magic smoke or anything. I'm just going to unplug this battery for a second. We are going to now bind this to your radio. We're going to also activate the DJI Air unit and configure this in Betaflight. So grab your radio, you're going to hit the sys key, and then we're going to come down, although you can't see it on the camera. We're going to go to the ELRS Lua script and then get the bind part ready. What you're going to do is you're going to plug in your quad to the battery 3 times. Once you hear tones, unplug it, and twice, unplug it, and then the 3rd time, just plug this in. And now you're going to hit bind as soon as that light changes. And we're going to hit bind on the radio and wait for a second. And we are now bound to the radio. Okay, you can unplug the battery again. we are gonna now set up the DJI Air unit. So grab a USB-C cable and plug yourself into your computer. You want the DJI Assistant app Consumer Drone Series, not the FPV Drone Series. They changed them a little while ago. I don't know why there's two of them. But once you plug this in, we're also going to add a bit of battery power as well, because you can't activate the Air unit without power. And then we're going to click on here, start the activation, confirm your account, and then we should get an activation success. What this will then take you to is the firmware screen, and on this screen you'll see which firmware you have. We're going to click the update button and update to the latest one. You're going to let that run all the way through to completion, and then if you hit back, it will tell you that your current firmware should be on the latest one. So if you're still plugged in, you can remove the battery and you can remove the USB-C from the Air unit, and you're going to plug a USB-C into the flight controller. You'll notice that I'm using a different one here because that flight controller doesn't work with a USB-C to USB-C, only a USB-A to USB-C, and I've just saved you 30 minutes of troubleshooting. Okay, so come into Betaflight. We're going to go to the ports tab here, and you'll see that UART1 is already selected as serial RX, which is the ELRS receiver. What we want to do is set the DJI unit as well, so that is going to be on TX6 and RX6, which means that when we come back to Betaflight, we're going to select UART6 right here, and then you're just going to hit save and reboot. Okay, we're going to let that start back up again, and then we're going to come back to ports just to make sure that that is still there and all of that has been saved. Okay, so come to configuration. I'm going to add a craft name in here just because I like to have that in the OSD, just so that I know which quad I'm using at the time. And this is my third Kayoumini, so I'm going to add number 3 as well. You're going to come down to the arming and change this to 180 degrees. And then everything else there looks good. We don't have a GPS or anything in there, so this is all fine. And then on the right hand side, this top section is fine. You don't need to change anything, but on the beacon configuration, I would put RX lost and RX set to on so you can use the motors to beep. Hit save and reboot. And then we are going to come over to power and battery, and you want to change the maximum cell voltage to 4.4, and the reason being is that we're going to be using high voltage lithium cells. So we're going to save that, and then we're going to come down to presets, and for the presets I want to set this OSD, which is the WTF OSD. If that's not showing, you can just type in WTF and then grab it here. The display port, we're going to set that to UART6, which is where our DJI unit is, and press pick, and then we're going to hit save and reboot. And then we're going to come down to PID tuning. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm not going to go through the PID tuning for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show on the screen what the standard PID tune looks like that Kayo have provided. This is a pretty good PID tune. I'm still playing around with this. There's a few things that I'm kind of doing just to see what that's like. I don't want to give you my PID tune, so follow this one on screen for now and go from there. My PID tune is not quite ready at this point in time, and if I do get to a point where I find something that is usable, then I will link to it down below in the description or in the comments. But you can also see the ESC configuration here that Kayo have provided too. So after your PID tuning is done correctly, I'm going to add in my rates. I don't mind you guys seeing this. They're actually quite slow rates, but I like to set the sensitivity to 140, my max rate at 700, and the expo to 0.8. And I do this for everything except for yaw, which I set to 700. On the right hand side there, I don't change anything on the throttle. I prefer a linear throttle curve. So I'm going to go over here and hit save. Okay, let's go to the receiver tab. Now, whilst you have this receiver tab open, we're going to change this down here to TAER, and hopefully that will map our controls perfectly to this if you're using mode 2. Hit save. And now you're going to want to get your radio, and with the radio you should, once you're connected, see that all of those movements map exactly correctly to what's happening on the quad on the screen. If it doesn't, you may need to change the TAER to something else. We're going to come down to the modes tab, we're going to add a range, and we're going to leave this on auto, which means that when I press a button here, it will automatically select the aux channel that is on. I'm just going to select that slider. I'm going to come down to angle mode and add angle mode in here on a switch, and that is going to be on aux 3. And then horizon mode, that's also going to be on aux 3, but it's going to be the next selection of that button. And we're just going to move those sliders up so that it captures that there. Next, you're going to come down to beeper, we're going to add range, and then we're going to use this button right here, which is a momentary switch, and then I'm going to slide those back up to the top here. And then we also want to set up turtle mode as well, which comes on here as flip over after crash, add the range, and I'm going to use it on this button here. So that has gone to aux 2, and I'm just going to move those sliders up to where that switch will go. I'm not going to add anything else on this particular quad, so I'm just going to hit save. And then I'm going to come down to the motors tab. Within the motors tab, we are going to just make sure that the motors are spinning in the right direction and they're in the right order. But the first thing we want to do is come down here and just change the number of poles, because these motors only have 12 magnets, not 14. We're going to hit save and reboot. And then we're going to come back to the motors tab again. And now we're going to look at reordering these motors. So you're going to need a battery plugged into your quad, and just make sure that propellers are removed, and one of the motors will start spinning, which is this one here. So we're going to select that one. The next one will start to spin, which is the top right, and the next one bottom left, and then finally this motor here. So we're going to select that one there, and then we're just going to hit save. Okay, we're going to come back into the motors tab, and now we're going to set the motor direction. We're going to select this wizard right here. Again, you need your props off for this as well. And then you're going to say start to spin the motors, and all of the motors will start to spin. What I like to do is use a little plastic thing there to see which way around it's spinning. That one is spinning out. This one is spinning in. This one, that is also spinning out, and this last one is spinning in. So you want to kind of match them up to what the diagram is saying there. And we can see that 2 and 3 are spinning the wrong way, so those should hopefully start to spin the right way, which they aren't. That one's still spinning in, and motor 3 is also still spinning in. So we have a slight issue. We're going to stop the motors, close that down. And then we're going to come into ESC configurator, and you can see on the Kayo suggested settings, they have motors 2 and 3 reversed here. Now in my particular build, I've done this and it won't set via the ESC configurator. So I'm actually going to switch 2 of the motor wires on the AIO. And by doing that, that will actually change the motor direction. So I'm going to do that for the 2 motors that are spinning the wrong way. Now back in Betaflight, we're going to come down to the OSD, which is the on-screen display, and I'm going to turn off a lot of these settings. I have a very specific way that I set these up. So I don't want any crosshairs, but I do want the name of the craft. I do want the average cell volume. I do want my warnings on there. And just make sure nothing else turned on. So I've got the warnings on. I also want the RSSI DBM value and the RSSI value, along with the link quality value as well. And then I'm just going to move the warnings down to here. I'm going to add my average cell capacity right here. And then I'm going to start moving all of these things that are related to my link into the corners. So my link quality goes over here. The name of the quad will go up here. And then my RSSI will go over here as well. And that is my OSD setup. On this side, I just want to make sure that everything is turned on and correct. So actually on the warnings, I do want to select link quality and the RSSIs as well. On the post-flight statistics, I want to see the battery voltage at the end. I also want to see the link quality and the minimum values for the RSSI. And then I'm going to hit save. And congratulations, that is your quad set up and ready to go. So there's only a few other things that we need to do now. One is we're going to add the strap on before we put the top plate right on there. And the reason is that you don't want to slide that strap through and then potentially pull out one of the antenna or cables. And then you're going to take the final countersunk screws, which are a little bit fiddly, and we're just going to screw these into the frame right here. And you're just going to do the same for all 4 of those screws. Once you're done, you've almost completed this, but there is one last thing that we need to add. In fact, 2 last things that we need to add on here. One being the battery pad, which if you forget that, your battery might slip off. So I've just kind of cut down some Ummagrip to size, and I'm just going to add this in. It's a little bit not straight, but that'll do nicely. Okay, I'll just put that in there. And we're going to take the top layer off. Just do up that strap. And the last thing we need to add are some props. So I'm going to make sure that all of these props are going the right way, and then just add these in, and then screw all of the screws in, and there you have it. You have now finished your quad. We're going to do a quick weight check on this. I don't have any of the arm guards on this at this point in time because we wanted to see if we can get it sub 100. That comes to 71.3 grams, and then with a 450 battery, that is 97.9 grams. So that is sub 100. On all of my other quads, my other Kayoumini, sorry, I do have these arm protectors. So this is what it looks like. It's 76 grams, and with that 450 battery, it is 102.7 grams. And there you have it, your Kayoumini is complete. As I mentioned earlier, I would recommend using some of the arm protection like I have on here. You can use the lightweight ones if you want to save some weight, but I do recommend these heavier ones because they protect the motors as well. Now go out, have some fun with it, and if you do build one of these and post a video, let me know in the comments and I'll come check that out on your channel.